Hello there. The EU Commission President has given a grovelling apology to Italy for the EU not helping it more at the start of this global healthcare crisis. Firstly, as ever, please kick that YouTube algorithm up the rear by giving this video a big fat like. And I'm always uploading new content, so please do check my YouTube channel daily. And here's a quick lockdown update. It's been extended by at least another 3 weeks. So, after weeks, if not months, of ignoring the cries for help from Italy to help it weather this current healthcare crisis, the President of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has belatedly apologised profusely for the bloc's inaction by saying, "It is true that no one was really ready for this. It is also true that too many were not there on time when Italy needed a helping hand at the very beginning. And yes, for that, it is right that Europe as a whole offers a heartfelt apology." And this apology comes hard on the heels of the recent Italian anger that has been directed at the EU, its institutions, and also some of the member states for not stepping up to the mark to help their fellow EU country in its hour of need, which has also resulted in a growing wave of Euroscepticism washing across Italy, to the point that, were there a Brexit-style referendum in Italy tomorrow, the Italexit campaign would win by a landslide. And Italy leaving the Eurozone and the European Union would be a body blow to the EU project, and probably cause the whole thing to implode and melt down. So it sounds very much to me like some Eurocrat or other has had a quiet word and shown Ms von der Leyen the figures and what would happen to the Eurozone and the wider EU if Italy did follow the UK out of the EU exit door. And so she's decided that a few words of apology and comfort about togetherness and solidarity, etc., will heal the wounds by saying things like, "And the truth is too that Europe has now become the world's beating heart of solidarity. The real Europe is standing up, the one that is there for each other when it is needed the most. The one where paramedics from Poland and doctors from Romania save lives in Italy, where ventilators from Germany provide a lifeline in Spain." But as I alluded to in a video yesterday, all that assistance came after the EU was shamed into some sort of action by the likes of Russia, China and Cuba, who had all fronted up with aid very soon after Italy's plight was recognised. But the EU's initial response was woeful. But now Brussels says it has a plan. Its very own Marshall Plan, to try and mimic the European recovery after the Second World War that was brought about by Harry Truman's Secretary of State, George C. Marshall, and huge truckloads of US dollars, most of which was eventually written off. And Ursula von der Leyen said that this was the moment to put behind us the old divisions, disputes and recriminations, to come out of our entrenched positions. But the recent decisions by the so-called frugal member states like Germany and the Netherlands to make sure that the Italians alone picked up the tab for the economic problems caused to their country by the healthcare crisis don't send out positive vibes for an EU-wide style Marshall Plan giveaway, do they? The Marshall Plan, or more properly the European Recovery Programme, started in 1948, 3 years after the end of the war, and it ran for 4 years, pumping $12 billion into the war-torn regions of Europe. In today's money, that's about $128 billion. But when looking at it as a percentage of US GDP, it would be hugely more, given that the US economy is about 68 times bigger today than it was back then. And also bear in mind that the US debt to GDP ratio was about 93% in 1948, and it is now running at about 110%. Now, most of the Marshall Plan money went to the UK, 26% of it, with 18% going to France and 11% to West Germany, with the rest being shared out across the rest of Europe. Now, as far as I can see, the Marshall Plan was not all about US philanthropy. The world had just been shaken by the realization of the destructive potential of splitting the atom. The Cold War had just started between the US and the Soviets, and Russia already controlled huge swathes of Europe, including East Germany. And unless US allies such as the UK and France could be put quickly back solidly on their feet, then the thought was that they too could fall to communist rule, and the US needed a buffer. But there was also something else. After the mass bombings and battles with destruction wrought on infrastructure and manufacturing plants, Europe presented a blank canvas for recovery. But replacing all that hardware proved to be expensive. At least we haven't got that this time, except for HS2 maybe. But further, an EU finance plan to kickstart the economy would be using its own member state resources, their own borrowings. There would be no free money pumped in from the outside. It will have to be borrowed on the markets and repaid. And with no prospect of the fabled Eurobond to share the debt across the Eurozone, then an EU-style Marshall Plan looks very improbable, if not downright impossible. And that would reduce the words of Ursula von der Leyen to just empty rhetoric. And it wouldn't take long for the Italians to work that one out, would it? But we do have that ardent EU federalist superstate backer and dreamer, Guy Verhofstadt. He asked the EU Parliament, why are we waiting for a Marshall Plan? He says that the EU Commission President should push forward with a €1 trillion European Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. And he then asked what was she waiting for? Was she waiting for the EU Council to make a decision? And he then berated the Council, the body made up of the leaders of each EU member state, saying that he's still waiting for them to decide on an EU banking union 8 years after the credit crunch. The EU Council is playing ping pong, he said. And he tweeted out, "What are you waiting for, Mrs. von der Leyen? You have the right of initiative. Propose a €1 trillion European recovery plan based on new own resources. Don't wait for a council that will never decide. Lift us out of this crisis as Delors did when he launched the single market." I've got to say that when historians pore over the rubble of the European Union in decades to come, they will point at the introduction of the flawed euro currency as the start of the whole EU slow-motion car crash that will ultimately destroy Delors' single market. But Verhofstadt talks about basing such recovery funds not on debt, but on new own resources. And that means things like an EU-wide tax system, taking directly from the people and bypassing member state governments. It also means reducing the proportion of things like VAT that EU member states can retain. It means the grasping hand of Brussels reaching into the pocket of every EU citizen and into every member state treasury in order to fill its own coffers, and so have the power to decide where that now mutualised money goes, who benefits and who picks up the tab. So Verhofstadt's €1 trillion rescue package would consist of existing money taken from member states and put under EU central control. There's nothing new about that money. All it does is reduce the ability of member states to look after themselves and their people, but it increases their reliance on Brussels and its Eurocrats. A Verhofstadt dream come true, and something the rest should outright reject. And that's exactly what the German and Dutch politicians will do, one suspects. No, a true Marshall Plan for EU recovery does not exist. That takes real, new money pumped in from the outside that's never repaid. And there is no US powerhouse to help at present. They are shut down by this global crisis as much as the rest of us are. But there are plans within the EU for Brussels to have what are called genuine own resources, starting with the new Multiannual Financial Framework, or MFF, from 2021 onwards. And this includes money from VAT, a common consolidated corporation tax base, an EU emissions trading system, and taxing non-recycled plastic waste. And no rebates to address imbalances, like the one that was negotiated by Margaret Thatcher that the UK used to have as a result of the Common Agricultural Policy, when we were a member. But of course we all know that once this sort of thing starts, then mission creep sets in, and before you know it, all tax will flow to Brussels and then be apportioned back out under Eurocrat control. Just like EU grants, it will be a case of, here is your EU money. I'm so glad the UK has left the European Union. And I think that this episode will lead to one or two other of the EU 27 member states also reviewing their positions, probably starting with Italy, however much grovelling Brussels engages in. Because one thing that von der Leyen also said was that saying sorry only counts for something if it changes behaviour. But I don't think that Brussels can change anything that would placate the Italians enough to guarantee their continued involvement in the great EU project. Anyway, if you want to hear more from me, please don't forget to subscribe and also press that little bell, or you won't get any notifications. And if you want to see more of me, buy a mug with my mug on it. So what do you think about this grovelling apology from the EU to Italy? Please share and comment, and thank you for watching.